Have you ever thought to yourself, gee, I sure love Dark Souls, but I don't really care for the action RPG mechanics? Well, I haven't. Those action RPG mechanics are part of why I really love the Souls-like games. Building your character, developing your playstyle, growing your stats, and finding and equipping your favorite items. That, combined with the intriguing world that begs you to explore every nook and cranny of its areas, is a lot of what keeps me pushing forward through the moments of inevitable frustration. I know that, most of the time, if I'm having an issue with a specific boss or area, I can go somewhere else to explore something different, or perhaps even grind for stats or items to help push me to what I need to win. And I guess failing that, I can summon a friend to help me out and hopefully move forward that way. But the point is, I have a lot of options when playing most Souls-like games when it comes to progression, and a number of different ways to approach the challenges that they present. But with Sinner: Sacrifice for Redemption, that whole idea is turned on its head. Before we go further, consider this your minor spoiler warning. I'll try to spoil as little as possible, but images of most of the bosses and some of their attacks will appear on screen, so if you want to avoid that, now's your chance. Sinner is a Souls-like without a world to play in, without actual RPG mechanics to help move things along. That part came as a bit of a shock to me since the store page itself calls the game an action RPG, and after playing through the game, I've yet to see the RPG side of it come through. However, it's entirely possible that the developers are taking the label and using it exceptionally loosely. Are you playing the role of a single person? Yeah, sure, let's go with that. Is there stat progression and weapons defined? Kinda? Like most good Souls-like games, you're dropped right into the game with very little explanation. You're given a quick little visual cinematic before being thrust into the control of a surprisingly small protagonist who's decked out in some pretty nice-looking gear. As you'd expect, this first area is a bit of a tutorial zone. Bare-bones instructions give you the lay of your controller, and you're asked to fight a few apparitions before moving on. Pretty standard stuff, except for your gear. My initial thought going into this was that the end of this tutorial was going to pull that classic trope of starting you off strong while you learn, only to strip all that power away from you in some catastrophic inciting event that leaves you weak and mostly helpless, asking you to work your way back up to where you were and eventually surpassing that strength. It might be an overused trope, but I actually kind of enjoy it and I was looking forward to this journey. But this wasn't the case at all. I exited the tutorial zone and entered a new room, and directly in front of me was a sort of headstone with some interesting markings on it. Upon interacting with it, I was given a cute little poem about who I was going to face and asked to make a sacrifice. Only after I made the sacrifice could I move on and face the first of this game's 8 bosses. And that's the game, more or less. Interact with the headstone in this hub area, read a poem, sacrifice some of your power, and then fight one of the 7 deadly sins. The game sort of leads you into fighting greed first, given its placement in the hub, but you can actually choose to fight any of the first 7 bosses in any order you please. But remember how I said that there's kinda stat progression in this game? Well, it's more like degression because you'll start at a maximum power and lose a specific aspect of that power depending on which boss you choose to fight. Greed lowers your maximum health and stamina. Lust makes your shield more fragile. Sloth punishes you for running out of stamina. Pride will decrease your damage output. Gluttony lowers the effectiveness and speed of your healing potions. Envy will steal most of your consumable items. And Wrath will weaken your defense and take away your health regeneration. You can only fight a boss if you've made the sacrifice, and you can only move on to the final boss after you've made all 7 sacrifices and defeated all 7 bosses afterward. If you need to, you can recover a previous sacrifice by interacting with a headstone again, but if you had defeated that boss already, you'll eventually have to sacrifice and defeat it again. Part of what'll help you decide the order of these fights for yourself is simply how you rank each sacrifice and each boss. That is, what order do you want to be weakened in, and how well will you be able to cope with that weakness when fighting the later bosses? For example, I chose to do Pride last because I believe the best offense is, well, a good offense, and I wasn't ready to cope with having my damage lowered for later fights. You're not left empty-handed for your troubles, however. After successfully defeating a boss, you're given the opportunity to either banish the boss or redeem it. If you chose to redeem it, your health will increase. By the end of the game, these health increases amount to quite a large boost in your survivability, so if you're a scrub like me, then it's definitely worthwhile. However, if you're up for more of a challenge, you can instead choose to banish the boss by attacking it more after you've defeated it, allowing you to forego that reward. In fact, if you're really up for a challenge, you're able to take on all 7 of the sacrifices before ever stepping foot into one of these boss arenas. It's a pretty neat gimmick that this game offers, and not something that I've really seen done before. The closest I've seen recently is Hollow Knight's binding mechanic in the Godmaster DLC, but that's not cumulative from one set of bosses to the next like it is here. It really is a sort of level down system like it says in the store description page for this game, but without any way to really level back up if you're unable to progress or you're having issues. And I think that's where Sinner might lose a lot of people, regardless of its perceived quality. Boss rush games like this are often slaves to the skill of the person playing them. Cuphead, Fury, Sinner, just to name a few. Solid games to be sure, but balanced inside a narrow niche that requires an above-average level of skill from its players. It's funny then that the Soulsborne series has this meme of a reputation around its brutal difficulty, when in actuality they're fairly forgiving as far as difficult games go. If you're stuck on a boss or in an area, chances are pretty good that you'll be able to find someone to summon to give you a hand. Chances are pretty good that you could spend an hour or so grinding to power yourself up. Or you could even combine these two for an even easier time. These games offer ways around their difficulty in a manner that complements their gameplay and allows each person to tackle the challenges the way they want to and are capable of doing. It's still not going to accommodate literally everyone, and I don't think any game can, but these options are at least there for the people who are still having fun and still willing to push through a tough time. Because of that, it's hard to see a game like Sinner ever reaching mainstream success in the same way that Dark Souls was able to. It simply isn't accommodating enough to players of a lower skill level in any of the same ways. An easy mode could possibly help with this issue, but when the game is little more than a boss rush, I can see it being exceptionally difficult to maintain and balance multiple different difficulties of bosses, such that defeating them is still satisfying for the person playing on that mode. But I don't really want to get into the difficulty debate here too much. That's a conversation for another video. As for the quality of the bosses, I do have to say that I had a lot of fun fighting through each of these challenges and eventually overcoming them. But I am the kind of person that these games are made for. The game was just difficult enough to challenge me without shutting me out, and I was just stubborn enough to push through any frustrations that arose. While I did enjoy Sinner's challenges, these aren't the best bosses you'll find in a Souls-like game either. Some have attacks that don't really feel like they cohesively fit in with the boss's theme. Others can be a bit too janky as a result of their mechanics or their arenas. And if you're a veteran of the series, most of them might be too easy, but overall it was something that I can say I really enjoyed by the time I was done. But when I was done, I found myself wishing that there was more to it. The visual set pieces, the lore surrounding each boss, the overall feel of the game, all of this makes it feel like the original intent for the game was to be a true Souls-like experience and more than just the combat. As if there would be a world to explore and places to fight through to actually reach these bosses, equipment to earn and stats to increase. And honestly, that's what I was expecting. I imagined all of this, paired with some mechanic that forced you to literally level down after leveling up so much in your journey, asking you to make a difficult choice of sacrificing all the power you've earned along the way in order to make progress. That's not what this is, but wouldn't that be cool? That's honestly what I thought I was getting myself into based on the description on the store page. But what we got is more like starting your adventure at the very end of your character's journey, and taking on the final bosses of a much larger game. You don't even unlock any new weapons until after you finish your first playthrough, and by then most people would be done, even though you unlock extra modes and weapons depending on what you do. There's just not a huge incentive to replay it. Sinner took me about 3.5 hours to beat, and that's with me not considering myself as a particularly skilled player at Dark Souls or Bloodborne. I'm one of those scrubs who will try a boss maybe a couple of times and then happily summon an ally to help me out, so veterans of this type of game will most likely plow through these bosses with very little resistance. And for the game's asking price of about $19 US, I'm not sure if Sinner really offers enough for most players to be worth buying at that full price. But if you're really itching for a fun Souls-like experience, you could do far worse than Sinner: Sacrifice for Redemption.